Right, I've pressed the button. So apparently,
and I've acknowledged. So,
well, yeah, you're on record now. So be very careful what you say. Okay,
I have my lawyer just on the other side of the door.
that's very wise.
He'll tell me what I can get away with.
Peter Watts, welcome to the show. Thank you for doing this.
Hey, it's at least we're not contaminating each other with exotic pathogens. So
I would rather meet in
as long as it doesn't
person.
kill me.
Yeah, I would rather meet in person, but I'll take this. I've got a weird interest. No, it's an interesting question to kick off. I saw your interview with Masters of the Universe, a podcast, which was about 3 years ago. It was actually recorded late 2019. I'm paraphrasing now. You said, expect a wave of pandemics and viruses over the next 20 years. And that was about 6 months before COVID, before anyone knew what COVID was. You were right. So here's the same question 3 years later. Are we fucked?
Yeah.
Next question.
I am in fact a little disheartened by a number of things. I was, in the first place, much as I would like to sort of, burnish my credentials as some kind of an epidemiological prophet. I wasn't making that prediction based on my own expertise, right? I just kind of keep up with the literature. I used to be a biologist myself, so I know some people who are still active in the field.
Yeah.
And this is what they had basically been saying, that there were these three fundamental variables that were converging, that were going to result in a series of pandemics that would essentially hollow out our urban cores. And when COVID came along, I mean, I had been saying this in one form or another for quite some time. I had been saying, within the next 10 years, this is going to be happening. But because I didn't really, raised as a Baptist, I have no self-confidence at all. So as the years went by, I didn't bother to reduce the window of vulnerability. So it was like for 10 years, I was saying within 10 years, this is going to happen. And then it happened like 6 months after the most recent time I said within 10 years.
I see. Yeah. Still,
and so
it's terrifying that it was kind of, in a way, kind of easy to predict, and it did happen.
Yeah, this is the thing. It was easy to predict, and people had been predicting it. And it's a little like climate change in general. You've got all these people now that half the world is on fire and the other half is underwater. Like, oh my goodness, how could we have known? I mean, Weird Al Yankovic was talking about climate change in 1976 in his valedictorian high school address, right? The information was out there before there was an internet.
Yeah.
So it's not that it took any great insight on my part or on anybody's part. You just have to be paying attention.
Mm-hmm.
And I was actually, as I am in most of my prognostications, sort of childishly optimistic. I was kind of amazed at what a candy ass plague COVID turned out to be. I mean, we've got something like a 1 or 2% mortality rate, and that's still shut down the planet.
Yeah.
I was expecting something, like smallpox.
Really?
I was expecting something that would really, that would have a pretty high virulence. But here you've got this dumb little thing, highly contagious, highly mutable, but still not that lethal. And its impact, it basically kicked the world on its side. We failed miserably, and we are continuing to fail. I mean, I've written all sorts of what people would call dystopian, grim science fiction.
Yeah.
But never in my fiction have I portrayed people as so completely fucking stupid that they would be faced with a global pandemic, be offered vaccinations for it, and simply refuse for no better reason than political tribalism.
Why do you think that is? That there's a distrust of authority? of science, people telling you this is how things are, you should have a vaccination, and they don't because they don't believe in
I,
science?
I,
What the hell's
I
going
don't
on?
think, no, I don't think that there's a mistrust of authority. I think what there is a mistrust of the outgroup. There have been studies that show that, if you actually have people who are trusted within your tribe telling you something, people are going to be a lot more inclined to believe it. It's not what is said so much as who is saying it.
Mm.
We're basically this tribal, short-sighted mammalian species. And I guess the favorite analogy that I've been using, maybe overusing lately, is you don't make friends down in Texas by telling people that vaccines work and they should wear a fucking mask. You make friends down in Texas by ratting out your friend when she tries to get an abortion.
God.
Truth is never the survival trait for a social species. The survival trait is conformity. So you have a lot of people in any particular political or social demographic who, before they make any brave pronouncements, before they speak truth to power, the first thing they'll do is they'll figure out, well, is this going to get me brownie points with my own particular in-group?
Right.
The term virtue signaling gets thrown around a lot, and I try to avoid that just because it has been it's such a cliche.
Yeah.
And
it's definitely lost all meaning now. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's generally associated, it's generally thought of as kind of a right-wing slur, but it's not true. I mean, it's universal, and it's just a basic tribal stick together because you can't survive on your own, so you basically need people to like you. So we just happen to have a group of people who are told by their leaders not to trust the other guys, the evil tribe up the river valley. We essentially have brains that evolved to deal with local problems with short-term consequences. And what we are doing now is wrestling with technology that has global impacts and catastrophically long-term consequences. But we can't internalize that shit. There's if you see somebody you want to have sex with, if you see a bear running at you out of the woods, if you have to chuck a rock at a moving target, your gut knows how to do that stuff. You feel it internally. It's not like you have to do the math. You don't have to look at the data. We are configured to deal with those kinds of immediate issues. Something that's not going to have a payoff for another 20 years, and by that time it'll be too late to change anything because of thermal time lags. We're not adapted to internalize those realities. This is why there's something called hyperbolic discounting, which, when you boil it right down, basically means that if I gave you someone a choice between getting like $5 today and $20 in 2 weeks, most people will take the $5 today, because the future simply isn't real to them. And in a Pleistocene situation, that actually makes a certain amount of sense, because you never know, the guy who offers you the $5 or $20 in 2 weeks, you might get eaten by a tiger or something, right? There's an inherent magnifying uncertainty the further into the future you go. But the flip side of that is, when we are actually capable of destroying biospheres, anything that happens like 5 or 10 years down the road, even if it's ecologically catastrophic, is going to seem less real to us than an inconvenience that we have to suffer now.
So civilization is faster than evolution, basically.
Yeah. We have. I mean, I'm not. Again, this is no great Peter Watts insight, right? This is something that evolutionary biologists and psychologists and stuff have been harping on for decades. And what disturbed me about COVID was that it was basically, fate threw us a practice run. This was a softball. This was a plague with training wheels.
Right.
And we totally fucked it up. There are other diseases out there that are coming to the fore and are going to be far more lethal. I mean, anthrax was recently contacted by a bunch of people in Russia as a result of the permafrost thawing and exposing a reindeer carcass. So you had an outbreak of anthrax just in the past couple of I believe this year. There's a bug called Nipah that, well, it was originally reservoired in bats, but it now is transmitted. It can be transmitted person to person. There is no vaccine for it. There's no cure. It's been sort of kicking around Malaysia and Indochina and that area for about the past 5-10 years.
Right.
It's been racking up kill counts in local villages as high as 80%. Its mean lethality is greater than that of smallpox. And it's only a matter of time before somebody vectoring that hops onto a plane or a cruise ship and, carries it into the heart of Toronto. And that's what's around the corner. I'm kind of astonished that hasn't happened yet.
Isn't it delusional optimism that the first pandemic, the big thing in modern history, didn't have a bigger impact? It kind of knocked society on its ass, but it didn't wipe out many people. So I guess the hopeful thing to say is, well, we kind of had a free run at it there, and the next time we'll be better prepared. Or do you think we are fucked because we just won't ever get our shit together?
Well, I mean, I would argue, depending on what you define as modern times, I think the Spanish flu racked up a fairly high kill count.
People have short memories, and no one's going, well, when the Spanish flu, it may as well be ancient history, right?
And that is the problem. It wasn't so bad. I think what we're going to learn, I think what we're going to take home from that is it wasn't so bad in terms of the human cost. But my God, think of the economy. There seem to be two kinds of people who get the primary bandwidth allocations these days. There are the mindless imbeciles who say, "Oh my God, think of the children," and then there are the other mindless imbeciles who say, "Oh my God, think of the economy."
Yeah.
And in the one case, it's basically an admission that I have no rational argument, so I'm going to try and bypass your higher cognitive faculties entirely and go right to the brainstem, because who doesn't love babies? And on the other hand, it's people trying to protect this human hypothetical artifact that has about as much connection to reality as the Klingon language. Klingon, as I understand it, I've never learned it, but you can go to Klingon summer camps, right? They've had actual linguists creating this language. Yeah. It's grammatically consistent. It's internally consistent. People have translated Shakespeare into Klingon. It's, by all accounts, a beautiful artifact. The only thing that needs to be kept in mind is that there's no such fucking thing as Klingon. And I find the economy to be, to a large extent, traditional economics seems to fall into the same ballpark. It's predicated on things like unlimited growth based on a finite resource base. It's based on the concept of humans as rational actors, which has never been true. There are certain little offshoots of it, neuroeconomics and circular economics and so on, that are sort of trying to address these. But certainly, judging by by no other criteria, the UK government at this point.
I don't want to talk about it. I don't want to talk about it.
Come on, I'm a dystopian science fiction writer. I can't make this. Yeah.
You've certainly answered the question. We are fucked. And my next question was going to be, what do you do for fun?
I go on podcasts and rub my hands together like Montgomery Burns and say, excellent.
You had a stack of you left the room to get a stack of books before we started recording.
Yeah.
Science fiction books, because we are going to talk about science fiction, believe it or not. Although we kind of have been already, you could argue. You've got a little stack. Are these your favorite, the best books you've ever read, most inspirational? What have you got?
Well,
Just do two for now, and we'll come back to do the others in a minute.
Okay. There's the disclaimer up front is that my current background in science fiction seems to come in, it's sort of a bimodal thing. There's the stuff that I read before I actually became a science fiction writer. Yeah. For some reason, back in the days when I was in grad school or high school, I would go through 2 or 3 books a week, just around the edges of my other stuff, no problem. Then for some reason, becoming a science fiction writer meant that I didn't have time to read as much science fiction. I have like literally floor to ceiling bookshelves in the other room holding a bunch of books that I want to get to.
Do you think I've read all of them? Yeah.
This laptop here is actually sitting on 2 of them. This one was given to me. This is the original, like, look at it. It's got a typical tacky, generic science fiction cover that could be anything.
Oh, no, I love all that. I love that.
It's selling for 60 cents. A friend of mine, not a friend of mine, a friend of my brother's, really interesting guy. Never occurred to me to notice that he was hideously scarred over most of his body. He had been caught in a fire as a kid, but he was just this guy, Dave Dryden. Gave me this book when I was like 8 or 9 years old because he was crashing with my brother for a bit. The Star's My Destination, in case that hasn't been.
Best.
By Alfred Bester. And, I'd been into science fiction, ever since the bookmobile rolled up and I'd sort of got Raiders of the Rings and Earthman Go Home and all that sort of juvenile crap, right? But this book was, and I read it, I've read it subsequently a few times as an adult. And the prose isn't always the best. And there's one spot where he literally cuts and pastes a chunk of prose from one part of the book and adds it to another part of the book. Maybe he didn't think we had attention spans.
Oh, I didn't notice that.
There are more ideas per page, per unit writing in this book than in 90% of the stuff I've read since. The idea of teleportation as a biological reflex.
Yeah, you can just do it.
And beyond that, and this is the thing science fiction is supposed to do. Science fiction just doesn't say, hey, look at this, teleportation is a biological reflex. It says, what are the social consequences? And this book goes into that big time. It just basically redesigns society as a teleportation-based tribe. Yeah. It's got one for the 50s. It was pretty radical. I mean, organized religion has been outlawed. So
I only read it for the first time last year or the year before. I came very late to that book, and I was surprised at the publication date that something from that era that must have stuck out like a sore thumb at the time, because it's quite gritty, isn't it? This about revenge mainly, isn't it?
It's about revenge, and the protagonist's a rapist. I mean, I actually have a significant doubts that it could get published today. Just really? Because, I do think that there is a climate where...
Isn't that crazy? Because back then you would have thought the censorship around that kind of thing would have been more than it is now. Wow, I didn't think of that.
Let me tell you a little story about censorship and China and the 3-body problem, which I think is relevant to this. Mm-hmm. If you've read that trilogy, the Dark Forest trilogy, it starts off.
I've read the first one. I'll get to the others. Yeah, I've read the first one.
It starts with a prologue that takes place during the Cultural Revolution.
Yeah.
Which does not show Chinese political systems in a particularly favorable light. Cixin Liu told me that in their original printing, that chapter was not placed up front as a prologue. It was buried in the middle of the book as a flashback. Their reasoning being that at the time, science fiction was considered kids' stuff. So the censors would sort of flip through the first few pages or the first few chapters and then just kind of toss it aside. They basically made a conscious decision to bury anything that they thought could be politically objectionable in the middle of a book that most censors wouldn't take seriously anyway.
I see. Yeah.
Once it became this huge breakout hit,
yeah,
and it was released in North America in its correct order, China has gone on to embrace science fiction as, you know, the new real literature, except for stories about time travel. Apparently, they
don't like time travel
because it implies that there could be different potential realities. That this is not the way things were destined to be. Something could happen differently.
Yeah, but is that the people saying that, or is that the party saying you're not going to like time travel because of this? Are we getting is there a filter between that opinion and us?
I don't know if the party ever comes clean. I mean, the party in Iran isn't going around saying we hate women and we're going to keep them in their place. They're saying we want to honor the traditional ways passed down by our God. So I don't imagine the Chinese would say, no, you're not going to like this because it portrays or it suggests the possibility of an alternative to the party. I'm getting this just from people I sort of spoke to off the record the one time I was in China.
Yeah.
But I wonder if, and of course the violence and the rape was pretty much off stage. I mean, the character was your standard gritty redemptive arc kind of guy.
Yeah.
And a lot of the things that would be objectionable are off stage. But I wonder if this thing didn't escape notice or condemnation simply because things weren't as polarized back then. There was a greater uniformity of it. And besides, hey, look at it. It's that crappy spaceship and ray gun stuff, right? Like people probably wouldn't even notice. That's my thinking anyway.
People weren't paying attention what was actually in there.
And it's I'm actually interested in having read it for the first time, having a deeper background when you read it for the first time than I did in science fiction. Do you think it holds up? Would you argue that it's a good book?
Yeah, I loved it, but I'm probably not the best person to ask about stuff holding up because I relish the dated stuff. I like that little slice of, oh, wow, that was written in 61. And I actually enjoy, if that's the right word, the kind of wonky politics of the time, you know, the inappropriate stuff, not because it's inappropriate, but it, some of the Heinlein stuff, you go back and it gets quite complicated because you think, is Heinlein trying to be forward thinking in his writing? And it makes it even worse, you know, some of his opinions. So I like the wonky politics when you get it, which is in quite a lot of books from that era. But as a science fiction book, yeah, it absolutely does hold up. And we don't necessarily have to take the exact message that Bester was trying to deliver and convert it into today, do we? But
we won't. I think my fear is, I mean, this is what's there's again. I think it goes back to this. You want to appeal to your in-group, and that means attacking an out-group. And once you get rid of the actual Nazis and fascists out there,
mm-hmm.
you have to look around for higher hanging fruit that you can attack so that you can appear like you're on the right side, right? And This is why you've got, there's this bunch of people shitting on the series Friends. Here in 2020 something, people are shitting on the homophobia that was implicit in it and absolutely. I mean, Friends was a terrible show. I ended up, my girlfriend at the time was a big Friends fan and my God, it nearly broke us up. It was a stupid show. It portrayed a scientist that was written by somebody who'd obviously never passed a science class in their life. It was just,
You understand it's a sitcom, though, right?
yeah,
The
but
idea
it's also like it was the early 90s. And feigning outrage, I mean, we're wiping out somewhere between 70,000 and 130,000 species every year. And if the thing that you're feigning outrage about is a fucking lame ass sitcom that came out 30 years ago, you are not paying attention.
I see. So
another group of people who do claim to be, worried about the current state of the affair, and half of them are shitting on Greta Thunberg because she's white and she's rich and she's privileged. And, the people who are really being disenfranchised by the destruction of the biosphere are people in developing countries. And that is all true. But you've got to wonder if the people who are making these allegations really think, they obviously don't think that we are facing a real crisis, because if you really think your house is on fire, you're not going to complain about the skin tone of the person who's pulling the alarm. And this is what we see time and time again.
Is that a distraction?
We are, I think, to some extent, even the people who claim to be concerned about the actual issues that are facing the planet today have, I guess, for want of a better word, monetized them into forms of status enhancement. So yeah, that kind of got us back to
that's the stars my destination.
Yeah. His 1950s era.
Hang on, let me make you jealous.
Pulpy ripoff of Count of Monte Cristo novel, which is the single novel that's kind of enlightened me and made the bulb go on over my head. And oh my God, I love that cover.
Yeah, it looks cool when you know.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is the rounded edge that Gallant's done. There's a little series of
them. I've lost volume.
This is the best one.
I'm not hearing you.
You're not hearing me at all?
You're muted. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Not if you can hear me.
Yeah.
Okay, I cannot hear you, and I have not touched anything.
Check.
I can hear you now. Yeah, for some reason.
Is that working again?
My system muted. No, wait a second.
How about now?
Oh. I don't know what happened. I think I've got a short circuit.
Yeah,
I think
now you've gone a bit
circuit in one.
Right. So halfway through talking about the stars of my destination, you suddenly got much clearer and louder. It was fine before. It suddenly went up a gear, and maybe you couldn't. And now it's gone back again. I heard a little glitch.
I think there's a loose connection in my headphone jack.
I'll tell you. I'll go like this if it happens again.
Okay, good enough.
Anyway, where were we?
I was loving the cover. I was ranting about.
I think all that will still be. It'll all be recorded, and because I can hear you the whole time, I think it's just your end.
Okay.
But the sound dipped a bit. Anyway, have you got any more? And unless you want to talk more about.
I mean, if we're gonna be spreading these. Okay. Yeah.
You do whatever, and this is what I mean. Probably don't need any more questions because each book, does something.
Second book, Sheep Look Up.
I haven't read it. I'm so embarrassed.
This book is one of two books that literally changed my life.
I haven't read any John Brunner. I'm sorry.
I read this book, and it. I'd always been into science fiction at this point. I read this book, I guess, when I was 14 years old, I guess.
Wow.
And that was the point at which I decided I got to do something. I'd wanted to be a marine biologist since I was like 6 or 7. This was when I decided I got to do something conservation related. I've got to help fix things because we're fucked. And then the other book that I read, which is not science fiction, it was a book called by a Canadian author called Farley Moid, called A Whale for the Killing.
Uh-huh.
And that was the one that got me into marine mammal biology. So this is one of two books that literally shaped the course of my professional life. And man, it is, I mean, you think I'm grim in my writing. This guy is astonishing. It starts off with a little sign saying, please help keep pier clean, throw litter overside.
Wow.
And it takes place in a world where weather reports start off with sulfate and lead alcohol levels all remain high, and everybody takes birth deformity insurance out on their kids because everybody's kids have things that are wrong with them. The rumors that the sun is out on a particular part of California causes massive traffic jams because nobody sees the sun anymore. There's smog everywhere. It is mind-bogglingly well researched. And
have you read Stand on Zanzibar?
Interestingly enough, this is another one. Brunner's the only one of my, shows up 2 times in my top 5. I read this before I read The Sheep Look Up. And I was younger at the time. I was maybe 11 or 12. And it took me a while to get into it. The text is not accessible for adolescents, young adolescents.
I'm about to read it. It was actually a read along for our community, and I was so busy I didn't get to it. But I'm close. I said that a few months ago.
It's got some great. I mean, it has everything, right? It has hobby bioterrorism. It has genetic engineering.
What was that?
It has
hobby
bioterrorism. People who just, manipulate bacteria to do nasty things and set them free just for shits and giggles. It's got all sorts of high living. I mean, it's the thing about Brunner's books that perhaps wasn't as common among his colleagues. I mean, it's everywhere now. Apparently, Tor isn't interested in publishing fantasy anymore unless it has something to say, which read into that what you will.
Mm-hmm.
But Brunner's books back in the 70s had real politic in them in a way that, I mean, yeah, sure, you got Heinlein and his, attempts at, sexual prognostication and so on. But Brunner had his hands on racism, colonialism, the Prexy in The Sheep Look Up, the president, is this brain dead figurehead who speaks in mindless platitudes. He reminds me of nothing more than the love child of George W. Bush and Ronald Reagan. And this book came out in 1971. It predicted acid rain. It was Stand on Zanzibar was about overpopulation. The Sheep Look Up was about pollution. A lot of it hasn't dated because, this was set in the 1980s, and here we are in 2023, and the military still isn't turning industrial battle lasers onto, anti-UN protesters. But again, anti-UN protesters, industrialists sending tainted food to third world countries, weird alien earthworms destroying agricultural crops. These things are not what you were reading science fiction for in the 60s and 70s, right?
Is that why you're drawn to it? Are you drawn to it because it was predicting a future and it was more interesting than good? Or is it on your top 5 because of the way that it makes a fully formed book with plot and prose and everything? Or does all of that come together for you?
I was not drawn to it. I was stuck. My dad was getting a master's in divinity or something down at Oregon State University. And I was stuck for the summer in this apartment with my mom and my dad, which was, a fucked up situation there. But there was a local library,
Right.
and these just happened to be at the local library, and I got
You just fell
on
upon it.
Zanzibar, and it was like, what's this? I mean, I've read all the other books. I might as well slot through this. I discovered Stanislaw Lem's. I read Solaris that summer too. So I wasn't drawn to it. I basically reluctantly picked it up, and it gradually won me over. And it's like one of those books that you just don't stop thinking about. And it reprogrammed my neuroplastic little adolescent brain.
So that influenced your career, not just writing, but your other stuff as well.
Yeah, I mean, I mean, everything literally, every conversation we have literally changes our minds. There's neural pathways withering and reinforcing in both of our heads just as a result of this interaction, right? So who knows? I imprinted on this stuff like a Lorenz duckling. Maybe it's similar to my fondness for Jethro Tull, right? I went into town one day to pick up Alice Cooper's Welcome to My Nightmare, and they were all sold out. So I picked up this thing called Minstrel in the Gallery, just because what the hell, I had $5 to blend. Absolutely hated it the first time I played it, except for maybe this one little bit in the middle of the title track. But I put it on again. I found myself putting it on, liking more and more and more of it. And to this day, I am a huge fan of Jethro Tull, even though Ian Anderson hasn't been able to sing for 30 years. Who knows what would have happened if I'd actually gotten Welcome to My Nightmare?
But you clearly have, or always did have, a brain, and hopefully still have a brain that is attracted to that deeper level, right? So yes, you may have picked up Alice Cooper, or you may have carried on reading space adventures, but the second you find something with a bit more substance, with something else there, you start swimming in it, and it does affect who you are afterwards. So you may not have, nobody forced it on you, but when you did discover it, that's where you kind of wallowed.
Yeah, I mean, that's sort of true, but I mean, look at Dune, for example, right?
Yeah.
Basically comes at the top of pretty much all the best science fiction novels ever written lists.
Yeah.
And I read Dune, and I thought it was great, and I liked it. I kind of stalled out on God Emperor, but I recognize why it's considered a classic. I liked it. Never ever in my life spent a second wanting to write like Frank Herbert. Dune is a substantive novel. It's about a lot of things, right? To go to your, it's not spaceships and ray guns. It's politics. It's religion. It's social engineering.
Yeah.
And I read that and I appreciated it, but I never thought I want to write that. When I read Brunner, I want to write him. When I read William Gibson for the first time, Neuromancer, the only reason I didn't want to write him was because I knew I would not be able to surpass that level of prose. But it would be like, a fondness of mine, or a fantasy of mine would be to grab a copy of Neuromancer, go back in time 10 years, type it out myself and submit it.
You love it that much? You're impressed with Neuromancer that much?
Probably not these days. I haven't gone back and reread it since the 80s when it came out. I'm a little bit, I mean, obviously a lot of scenes still stick in your mind that don't hold up today. The idea of 30 megabytes of RAM being a hot black market item seems a little, in hindsight, a little imaginative.
I have a strange relationship with that book. I just didn't like it the first time I read it, because I just didn't understand what the hell was going on. And normally I don't really care about that. I don't care if I completely understand. I don't need to. Somehow I can still enjoy a book. But I knew there was more there because of how everybody raves about it. So I went back to it a couple of years ago. Now I love it, but I'm not sure why. And I need to go back again. It's just that big idea. He just has a big idea there that I love. The idea of having a split AI that and I think what he's talking about there is something that we can't quite comprehend, yet Gibson does. And there's always going to be that kind of mismatch between what's actually happening and whether we can truly understand. You write a little bit like that, right? It's not 100% coherent, right?
It tries to be.
You know what I mean, though? It's not just story, plot, you finish and go, huh, wonderful
Yeah,
story.
no, I'm definitely right. I definitely write with an eye to exploring an idea.
Mm.
And for me, that's a strength and a weakness. The strength is that they're cool ideas. You know, I like to think that I can come up with some pretty nifty ideas and put pretty original spins on them. The weakness of that is that the characters tend to become chess pieces in service to the idea, as opposed to becoming sort of fleshed out characters in their own right. To some extent, I can get around that by basing characters on people I actually know. So I don't actually have to develop characters from scratch. I can just steal somebody else's personality and stick them on a thing. But you know, as time goes on and you run out of friends, it becomes more important but more obvious where my shortcomings as an author.
So you don't consider yourself a good writer of characters?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I've just finished a story now, which oddly enough, I mean, basically it's set in the Blindsight universe. It's called The 21-Second God. And it's basically a takedown of all the things that are inevitably going to go catastrophically wrong if Elon Musk gets his way with Neuralink. And I've recently found out that the co-founder of Neuralink has read this story, which is amazing because it hasn't been published yet.
Oh my God.
And has recommended it to something called the Creative Destruction Labs as their November book club reading. So the Rotman School of Business's Creative Destruction Labs is now reading a story that's I regard as kind of a takedown of Neuralink by the co-founder, which was put onto their plate by the co-founder of Neuralink. So I'm not really sure whether this is going to be like they've invited me to sit in, right? So they can get my feedback. And I'm not really sure whether it's going to be like a conversation or an interview or an ambush. But hell, I was in grad school for 10 years, so I can deal with the occasional ambush.
What do you think Neuralink? Do you think there's a sinister idea behind the whole thing?
I don't think
form of control, ultimate control.
I don't think it's well. I mean, yeah, probably, but that's not my objection. My concern is not that it's fundamentally evil, although it may be. I mean, we are fundamentally evil as a species. So my concern is that it's fundamentally ill thought out. And this is something that I've encountered a few times when I've spoken to sort of tech bros and people who are sort of held up by the Wired and the Ars Technica crowd as sort of being on the cutting edge. They tend to not know. I'm kind of scared at how little they know their actual field. The guy who invented neural dust, which is a kind of a distributed brain brain-computer interface where you put these little silicon sperm cells into your brain and they talk to each other through compressed ultrasound. It's kind of a network of nodes in your brain. Had not heard of a Sony patent that I read about in Wired magazine back around the turn of the century. The Sony patent was a blue sky tech basically calling dibs on the idea that you can bypass. You don't have to worry about iPhones or earphones or virtual reality headsets.
Right.
You can plant sensory
straight in there, yeah,
directly into the brain by using, again, compressed ultrasound to stimulate the Penfield homunculus, the somatosensory cortex. And I mean, this was no big secret, right? It was in the pop science literature at the time because this was just a year after The Matrix had come out, so everybody was sort of interested in that kind of thing. This guy had so I asked him, what are you worried in light of the Sony patent that your neural dust by communicating with itself using ultrasound, might create visual artifacts in the somatosensory cortex. People might start hallucinating things. People might start getting visual static. There could be all sorts of.
So you don't have to go into some sort of trance or sleep. You where is it? Is it you just see it in your
neural dust? I mean, neural dust, the way it's perceived or the way it's been described is you basically just inject it through the blood-brain interface.
How do you experience it?
And it distributes. Well, it's not something that you experience in and of itself. It's an interface to other experiences. It's a way of allowing the brain to communicate with a computer wirelessly.
Right.
By having this distributed network. Now, the Sony patent, presumably you would have a helmet or something that would focus compressed ultrasound on specific parts of the brain.
Yeah.
So that would be something that you would wear. But what disturbed me was that A, nobody had asked him the question before, so he didn't have an answer for me. And B, he hadn't heard of the Sony patent, which had been widely reported on at the time. So you're looking at a technology which we know can stimulate the firing of neurons in the brain.
Right. Before we understand what that actually...
As a side effect, right?
Yeah.
And they haven't, and I would have been perfectly happy to hear the guy say, yeah, we're using a different frequency of ultrasound, or we use a particular kind of standing wave so that by the time it actually hits the dendritic connections, you have a sort of a null signal. Anything to suggest that they'd actually thought about the problem would have shut me up, because I don't know anything about this shit, right? It's like, if you thought about it, that's fine. I was just interested in, but they hadn't thought about it. And one of the things that sort of got, and I don't know how much of my stuff you're familiar with. I gave a talk back in Bulgaria, I think in 2018, 2017, that talked a little bit about the Neuralink issue. Mm-hmm. I wrote an essay for Aeon a while back that also dealt with it, but Musk is on record explicitly as stating that what he wants to do is create an interface that connects brains to each other and to the internet as seamlessly as our limbic system is connected to our neocortex. And there are all sorts of problems with that. One of the fundamental ones being that a vast number of vertebrate species on this planet don't have a neocortex. The reptiles and the fish, they do just fine with the brainstem. And by any reasonable or empirical judgment of what's conscious, they are conscious. They have sentience. They're not self-aware necessarily. They don't sort of sit around writing philosophical treatises, but they subjectively feel pain. They subjectively feel fear, hunger, these sorts of things. So they have, in a sense, minds. And we have all those parts, but we also have the neocortex layered over top of them. And so the question is, is there another little sub-Peter or sub-Moid down there screaming to be let out because we're using it to take out the garbage? Does that consciousness persist? The evidence would suggest no, because consciousness expands. If you use the standard split brain experiments that happened back in the 60s, mm-hmm. You have basically two different personalities in a single head because you've split the corpus callosum. The same thing happens with you don't have to even use surgery. You can just anesthetize one hemisphere so that the brain is now running on one core instead of two cores. And the individual will suddenly start manifesting different personality traits. V.S. Ramachandran has a YouTube video you might want to check out, in which he basically interviewed a split brain person, one half of whom was a Christian and one half of whom was an atheist. And
This is very David Lynch, you know. I think a lot of his writings come from that. Like,
Well, the problem is David Lynch, you can always say, well, that's kind of just creepy brainstem dream logic. This isn't dream logic. These are surgical and behavioral and irrefutable results, right?
is this all folding into the theme of the conversation, which is we are fucked? Because are these people following these techniques and developing them because that's what people do?
I've got a cat who's demanding to be let out. I'll be right back.
Okay.
Oh. Never mind, my wife let her out. Yeah, no, I think this particular question is not so much are we fucked, but what is we? In a Neuralink world, if Elon Musk aspires to connect us to each other and to the internet as seamlessly as our brainstems are connected to our neocortexes, and again, that's a direct quote.
Yeah.
Then you're basically talking about a corpus callosum connecting multiple brains. And because we know that a half a brain is perfectly capable of running its own sapient persona, but that when you connect it to another half of a brain, that thing disappears and gets swallowed up by another singular, larger consciousness. When you have, there's a pair of conjoined twins in BC, the Hogan twins, who are fused at the thalamus. They can read each other's thoughts. They'll watch, one of them will close her eyes and the other one will watch TV for both of them. They will plan practical jokes subvocally. You tickle one of them, the other one will laugh. And
hang on. They're joined, right?
At the thalamus.
What does that mean? What does that mean exactly?
The thalamus is a lower brain structure. Okay, you've got. Well, here's the thing.
So they share thoughts. They share brain waves. I've got the terminology fucked, but they share a brain.
They call it talking in their heads. That's how they refer to it. I find it rather frustrating because you get the occasional puff piece, you get a CBC documentary about, the little miracles and so on. You get puff pieces in the New York Times, personality profiles of, the family. You get footage of them going into the hospital in Vancouver to get an MRI, but it always cuts before you actually see them going to the MRI. And they're fused this way, right? Like they are kind of like a V because they're fused at the head. They wouldn't even fit into a conventional MRI machine. That. Yeah. Damn. Just Google or DuckDuckGo rather, Tatiana and Krista Hogan, and you'll see pictures of them, right? But as far as I know, I poked around. I found one undergraduate thesis on them from the UBC. I haven't seen any scientific papers released on them at all. But just to jump back, even the people who are split have the corpus callostectomies, the split brains.
Yeah,
their brain halves are not completely isolated. They can still talk the long way through the brainstem. They've got dial-up, is the way I like to put it. They don't have broadband because the big thick broadband corpus callosum that connects the hemispheres has been cut, but they can still talk the long way. But it's a longer way. There's been a number of studies that suggest that in order for consciousness to be integrated into a single coherent self, you need a latency of like no more than a few hundred milliseconds. The signal has to be able to cross the whole system. You've got a call and response that has to happen in this short window. And if it takes longer than that, consciousness breaks down. It kind of decoheres from I into we. So
you think there's a possibility then people get hooked up to Neuralink and what happens then? What happens?
I think they deprecate from soul down to subroutine. I think they stop being an individual consciousness. I think what Neuralink aspires to be is a corpus callosum connecting multiple brains to the internet. And I think you can retain your individuality if you throttle the bandwidth between those different brains to the point where you don't get the kind of throughput that you get in the corpus callosum, which according to some preliminary calculations that I solicited from a neuroscientist, the corpus callosum basically has the bandwidth of a modern cell phone. So it's not like we lack the technology for that kind of a fat pipe.
Right.
So my fear is that, yes, you can, in the same sense that the Hogan twins have distinct personalities, even though they are connected at the thalamus. But the thalamus is a lower brain structure. It acts as a sensory relay, amongst other things, which probably explains why they can see through each other's eyes and so on.
Yeah.
But it's enough of a dial-up connection that they maintain separate personalities. The question I have is, what happens if they were actually fused at the neocortex and not at the thalamus? I mean, does a neural pathway know, oh, this is where the skull would normally be, I better turn back now? It's just going to go. I mean, do you have still two individuals, or do you have a single thinking being with twice the neurocomputational mass of a normal human mind?
But wouldn't that sensation, wouldn't that emerge quite quickly, in the testing stage, and we go, oh shit, look what this is doing. This is not the desired effect. And then they change it. It's not likely that half of North America is going to be plugged into this thing and going around their business, and then, oh man, look, our consciousness is kind of splitting. You know what I mean? It's not going to emerge way down the line, is it? Wouldn't it come about a lot sooner than that? And then it can be, again, I'm being optimistic about the technology, which is, the plan isn't to do that to the mass population. It's supposed to be a money-making thing that people would want, right? Yeah, and there's the other point. Only rich people are going to get this, because it's going to be an expensive thing, right? So why not just let it happen? All the rich people can just go, phew, and we'll pick up the pieces.
I actually wrote an X project story about that. About essentially, the rich early adopters all had Neuralink, and somebody hacked the emergency broadcast system to change their biochemistry to invoke suicidal ideation, and all the one percenters hurled themselves off of buildings.
Well, great minds think alike. It's like we're neurally linked, Peter.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, they bought the story and they published it, but then it kind of disappeared from their collection, and nobody's ever come back. I don't know. They shouldn't have approached me in the first place. Anyway, to answer your points, in the first place, yes. You would think.
You would think.
And even in the story that I've written, the 21-second God, the bandwidth was throttled, so that, like the Hogan twins, you can access each other, but you retain your individuality. Okay, so yeah, I got that covered, at least in the story. In terms of the real world, though, I would expect that obviously this kind of an issue is going to manifest well before wide deployment.
Mm.
What disturbs me, in a way similar to the neural dust thing, is that the people who are actually working on this, if Elon Musk is to be taken at his word, haven't even considered this possibility yet. And it seems to me that when you say, shouldn't this come out well before it goes wide? I'm saying, it should come out well before they even start animal testing. They should have done a literature search. They should know that this kind of stuff is going on. So it'll probably, I suppose that worst case scenario, they try it out on something and it works, and they try it out on something else and it works, But because you can't actually talk to rats, or you can, but they don't talk back, and you can't
Yeah.
talk to dogs, and you can't talk to chimpanzees, at some point they're going to have to do it to a human. They'll do it to a human, and if
Well,
my, you know, if
isn't
my worst
isn't the
case,
worst? Sorry, isn't the worst case scenario China, for example? China know that this shit is happening somewhere, okay, and they just make their own version, unregulated, more money, more research. They go for it, and they do a similar thing over there, where the consequences aren't as dire as they are in a democratic country, right? Isn't
you
that the
have
fear with a
you
lot of
have
these
such
technologies?
you have such adorable faith in the checks and balances of
Just
the
putting it out
Western
there.
world. Yeah, I don't think, you know, I think we tell each other different stories, but yeah, I suspect that there's plenty of evidence that these things will happen worldwide if it. But I suspect that you know what. Look at the ethical situation here. Eventually, they're going to have to do it to human beings, and that's
Yeah.
the point at which they could realize. Wait a second, um, Frank and Josephine stopped being Frank and Josephine; they became Francocene. That's not good, and they break that up. But what they've done there is essentially split. You have a manifested individual, right? The moment those two join, Francocene exists. They exist as an autonomous individual in the same way that your two brain halves interacting at, you know, again, at as Musk aspires
Right.
to, interacting seamlessly. For the duration of that experiment, there will be a new conscious entity living in that lab, experiencing that protocol. What are the ethical implications of, once you have created that being, shutting it down? Analogously, here you are with your two cerebral hemispheres sitting quite comfortably in that skull. How would you feel if somebody came up to you and said, hey, guess what, Moid? You were an accident. We didn't really mean that. We're going to split your brain in half now and put things back the way they were.
So you're saying the second that gets switched on, that's
You've got a new
conjoined
individual.
entity of the two personalities and memories and everything all in the same place, and it's got its own way of doing shit and thinking about
It's got
shit.
its own perspective. It becomes a new individual.
But it's like an instant birth, an instant consciousness. So it kind of I guess it would, wouldn't it?
This kind of stuff doesn't take. I mean, it's true that in terms of the surgical partitioning of a brain, they would, you know, they didn't. Nobody split the brain because they just want to see what would happen. It was a way of short circuiting feedback loops that were promoting epileptic seizures.
Yeah.
And then sort of afterwards, when everybody went Dr. Strangelove and you started getting evil hands doing shit, that they finally figured out what was going on. But that doesn't mean that it took the different personalities that long to manifest. As I say, you can anesthetize a brain. It takes just minutes, right? To anesthetize one half of the brain.
Yeah.
And the person is, and they do this, you know, preparatory to brain surgery, for example. So you anesthetize half the brain, and all of a sudden, this shy introvert who can't talk to girls starts pinching asses and telling, you know, dirty jokes and hitting on the nurses, like just like that.
Wow.
So going from two cores to one causes an almost instantaneous change, at least in the personality affect. I mean, who knows what's going on inside, but they certainly act like a different person.
And you're saying that entity has a right to, well, it has rights, full stop. It would be a living being that we can't simply,
we don't even have rights.
shut down.
I mean, Biden and Obama can order extrajudicial drone strikes and kill people at wedding parties with complete impunity. The Catholic Church in this country, anyway, we just discovered today that St. Anne's, a residential school in Ontario, literally had an electric chair that they used to torture kids.
Wow.
We're still digging up. We're digging up dead indigenous kids like they were fucking potatoes. And yet the Catholic Church hasn't only not been declared a terrorist organization by our government, even though it meets every criterion for terrorism under Canadian law, it still gets tax breaks. So I don't think there is anything in terms of rights, whether you've got one cerebral hemisphere or two. I mean, these things are arbitrary and they're decided by the people in power.
Very true.
But in ethical terms, yeah, I mean, it would have been interesting, it would be interesting to talk to that one half of a brain individual who lost his sexual inhibitions or lost his shyness or whatever. But you can't anymore because he's been swallowed back up by the dual core version. That individual existed for as long as the one half was anesthetized. And he doesn't exist anymore.
What about beyond that? Can you get more than two entities together and make some weird? I'm not making fun of this, but could you put more brains together linked, or is that what Neuralink could be? You've just got this super intelligent.
In the 21-second God, somebody subverts the time lag, and 15 million people are joined for 21 seconds. So you basically have a single computational coherent entity with 15 million times the mass of a human brain. Now, what could it do in that 21 seconds, knowing that it's going to be shut down, knowing that eventually the breakers will be thrown and things will get back? What will it do in the 21 seconds it has to exist?
Anything.
Yeah. So anyhow, that's the story I wrote.
When does that book? When does that come out? You said it's not published yet.
No, it's not. I mean, last I heard, hopefully 2023 sometime.
Okay. It's a short story or a full novel?
It's just a short story. It's 8,000 words.
All right.
But
right. I'm looking forward to that one.
But what I'm doing here is I'm just sort of recycling my greatest hits from my Bulgaria talk and my AMS and stuff. If you want more information on that stuff with links and references and stuff, you can go to that. But yeah, it's these are fascinating questions, and you start with the question of what is consciousness good for, and you end up with the free energy minimization people say, if they're right, our brains are aspiring to non-consciousness. The only reason we're conscious is because we're constantly being surprised by our environment. The smarter we get, the more familiar things become, the less unexpected events happen to us, the less conscious we will become, because consciousness is an incredibly energy expensive process. And the only time it manifests is when we have to sort of deal with the unexpected. What's unexpected to something that's 10 times as smart as a human being? What's unexpected to something with 15 million times the mass of a human brain? When you get too smart, you stop being conscious entirely. At least this is.
Why would you stop being conscious?
A consequence of this.
Why would you stop being conscious entirely when you get too smart?
Well,
is this something you consider when you write about first contact, for instance? We come in contact with an alien intelligence, and they've done this kind of shit 10 times over, right? And then we come in contact with them, and the communication is so off because they just cannot be thinking the same way we are. Or have you gone that extra step and say, when you're so smart, you stop? The consciousness dies, or what is it? Just a ball of intelligence? You're not.
I don't so much do it when I write about first contact. What I did, with Blindsight was I wanted to explore consciousness, and a first contact story seemed like a cool context in which to sort of wrap around the idea like a jacket.
Yeah.
So it was fundamentally a rumination on consciousness, sort of tarted up with space vampires and aliens. But back then I was just, what do we need consciousness for? Intelligence and consciousness are two separate things. Consciousness has all these drawbacks, blah, 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 whatever. And, but recently, science marches on. Recently, I read a book called The Hidden Spring by a dude called Mark Solms. He's a South African neuroscientist. And he belongs to a movement started by another neuroscientist called Frist, called the Free Energy Minimization Movement. And their basic premise is that self-organizing complex systems will inevitably tend to reduce the energy expenditure necessary to keep them persistent. And consciousness, according, if I'm reading Psalms correctly, consciousness is basically, it inhabits that space between what the system expects and what the world delivers. So you can drive, from work to home and back, and you'll be unconscious of what you're doing the whole time, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
You do it automatically. Everything's, and then a cat jumps into the road in front of the car. All of a sudden you become instantly conscious. Before you were thinking about, how you were going to kill your boss or what you were going to watch for on TV that night. You weren't thinking about driving. No. Cat in front of you. All of a sudden, whoa, that's where your consciousness comes, because you have been surprised. The universe has thrown you something that you were not expecting.
So it's like another version of you keeping an eye out while you're doing your day-to-day tick over. It's coming in and out all the time, yeah?
The non-conscious, yeah. I mean, basically what happened, if you read the books and you read the literature, they talk about periaqueductal gray and Markov blankets and stuff, and all sorts of information theory about how, information comes into the system, and for something to become conscious, the system has to produce output that can affect its environment. So like if you're too hot, the system has to be able to move away from the heat so that it can get colder, this sort of thing. It's basically a feedback loop between the inside of the system and the outside of the system. And as long as that difference is minimal, the system doesn't have a need to do anything, right?
Yeah.
So free energy minimization just means complex systems are lazy, as far as I can tell. And the point is, you build an internal model of the universe. And as long as the feedback that you're getting from the outside conforms to that model, it's steady as she goes. You don't need to think consciously about it. You're just driving to work. The moment the input coming in from outside varies from that, you suddenly have an error term. And when that error term opens up, that's where consciousness emerges. So the fewer error terms you get, the smaller the error, the less opportunity and need for consciousness. And this is not just me pulling this out of my ass here. Solms in his book literally states that the self aspires to zombiehood. That's what we're, and we're nowhere near it because we can't predict everything yet.
You mean evolution would like to just boil it all the way down to survival, reproduction, and not actually doing anything?
No, not in the first place. I don't think it's evolution. I think he's going more basic than that. I think he's going.
Just it didn't emerge out of evolution.
Complex physical systems in general. This would also apply to a robot or an agent, an AI agent in software. Yeah. Any complex system that has a two-way interaction with its environment and builds internal models of its environment. It would apply to all of them. And in terms of whether it just, it all comes down to, are we just basically glorified bacteria whose job is to breed? One of the things I've been playing around lately is that, ironically, I think the best way to ensure our survival is to stop caring whether we live or die, because our survival instincts are tied up with so many cognitive biases, short-term cognitive biases that oddly enough, our short-term selfishness is what's going to kill us in the long term. But I don't think that they're necessarily saying that we devolve back into brutish, brain dead thugs who just want to sort of eat and fuck and sleep and breed. I think you may be making the same mistake that a lot of people do, which is to assume that if you're not conscious, you can't be intelligent, you can't be sophisticated. And one of the wildest
I've never
ideas
really thought about it. The two are obviously the two are linked, but I think I'm just assuming that I struggle with the concept of being extremely intelligent and lacking the consciousness. I really struggle to see the big difference in the two, probably because I've never really thought about it that much.
There is a paper that came out around 2006, I think, and there have been a number of papers since on the subject called what is it? The attentional deficit or something. Anyhow, they gave people a series of choices, tasks that they had to perform. And in one case, one group of people, they basically had 4 minutes to solve a particular problem. And one group of people could consciously dwell on that problem. The other group of people had to solve unrelated word puzzles in the meantime. So they were constantly distracted and were not able to think about the problem that they had been assigned. And then they both had to make their decisions at the end of 4 minutes.
Right.
When it came to things like really, really simple problems, which color glove do you want to wear was, I think, one example. Just one variable questions. There really wasn't a difference between the two groups in terms of their decision making. When it came to complex decisions, like which of two models of car to get, and there were something like 9 or 14 variables, like a whole shitload of different variables that had to be weighed. The group that wasn't allowed to think consciously about the problem made significantly better decisions than the group that was allowed to consciously ponder which car they should get. And the conclusion, I can send you the link afterwards if you want.
Please do.
The conclusion from this is that sometime in the relatively recent past, we started making decisions consciously rather than intelligently, and we're just not very good at it yet. And when you find out, I mean, we've known since the 80s that we're not even really in control of the wriggling of our own fingers. When you make a decision to move your fingers, the electricity is already halfway down your arm. You start to act on a decision a half second before you, quote, make the decision.
Yeah, I guess
there have been more recent, now that was like Benjamin Lebay's stuff back in the 80s, but there have been more recent studies that show that in some cases, our brains make the decisions 7 to 10 seconds before the brain thinks it makes the decision. So the current thinking is that we're not really making these decisions at all. There is something inside us that's non-conscious that makes the decision, sets the body in motion, and then kind of sends a memo up to the pointy-haired boss in the neocortex. And the boss gets this memo, and it sees the hand move, and it assumes that the memo was the decision that it made, as opposed to being informed of a decision that something else made. And this manifests itself really interestingly in things like homicidal somnambulism, where you can get out of bed, drive across the town, stab your mother-in-law to death, clean up, the mess, go back home, unconscious the whole time. And the jury will let you off because looking at the neurological evidence, this happened right here in Toronto, actually. Looking at the neurological evidence,
right,
they conclude that you, the thing receiving the memos, did not do any of these terrible things. Something inside there with you did. There are people, I mean, we all know sleepwalking. We all know, the whole driving as a zombie kind of thing, right?
Yeah.
There are sleep sexers. There are people who go out, and cruise bars and pick up people unconsciously and then wake up in the next morning and they're absolutely horrified to find a strange guy in their bed. There are people who can barely, draw a Gary Larson stick figure when they're awake. When they're asleep, they do these incredibly articulate and beautiful and detailed works of art, but they can't do it when they're awake. So,
well, it's extraordinary to think that we're moving around as passengers inside of something else completely, and we're experiencing it out of sync with what's really happening. I mean,
that's a very good
simulation theory, or is that too far?
That's something else I'm writing a story about, actually. Simulation theory is, I mean, it is.
It's a bit of a cop-out, because you could just say, well, this is something much more intelligent, if that's the right word, making that happen. I mean, it's one answer. Don't know if it helps us, though.
Well, I mean, there are so many. The problem is there are so many batshit. I mean, you've probably heard of physical panpsychism, the idea that all matter is conscious to some extent.
Right.
And this sort of gets around the idea that physics can't explain. Yeah, we can follow these neural impulses. We can send the electricity across the meat, but how does that mean the meat wakes up? How does that happen? Some people sort of get around it by saying, well, that's consciousness is like a fundamental property of all matter, like the spin or the charge of an electron. And when it's configured in certain ways, it manifests as ways, which sounds to me like a cop-out, until you realize that, the flavor of a quark and the spin of an electron, these two are considered, fundamental properties, and we don't give the physicists any hassle about that. But then there's this other guy out in the corner who says, no. Matter is not conscious. Matter is consciousness. And matter itself is simply a manifestation. Consciousness is all there is. And matter and independently physiological bounded systems are the way the universe has a sort of basically giving itself the mother of all multiple personality syndromes. That do you think it makes Philip K. Dick look sane, right?
Yeah.
But these things are getting published in peer-reviewed journals, both philosophical and neurophysical chemical journals.
Do you think we're on the verge of making something like quantum computers, or the singularity comes along and it's so smart and so fast that it can start to answer some of these questions? And then what do we do with that information?
I don't know if the question is so much whether the next generation of intelligences will be able to answer the question. I think a more fundamental question is, will we be able to understand them?
Right.
Our brains are, I can throw a spear at you and my gut understands Newtonian mechanics because that's the world we evolved in, and that's what we're good at doing. There was no evolutionary percentage in understanding the space between atoms when we were evolving. And that's why quantum mechanics just seems so batshit crazy. None of it makes sense. The only reason we buy any of it is because the math drags us kicking and screaming towards these things that do violence.
It does. It doesn't feel real when you explain quantum entanglement to someone and say, this is it. It's true. This is what happens. That doesn't help, because it.
Yeah. You can explain it, but it don't. I mean, there's what you recognize by looking at the charts and the math, and there's what you feel to be true in your gut. And none of that stuff feels to be true in our guts. Now, it seems to me that when you get to the next, we have not yet reconciled general relativity and quantum mechanics. Yeah. When that happens, we may not be able to, we may not even be able to understand the math. I don't know. I'm just sort of spitballing here. But we've got caveman brains, and caveman brains were not designed to explore the quantum realm. And so we may not be capable of understanding, we may not cognitively be capable of grasping the actual truth. Now,
I'm not sure we have to. I'm not sure we have to understand a unified theory. If we have one, then we can just use it to kind of explore other parts of science, right? I don't think we necessarily have to understand why there even is a unified theory. Or what if there
Then
isn't?
what you're getting, but then what happens then is that you are science becomes an act of faith. These things that are much smarter than us assure us that this is the way things work. I mean, this is something, you
Yeah,
know.
but that word faith, at least you're assuming you're pointing in the right direction, and you're slowly stripping the onion back a tiny bit and seeing more of what is real, right? Whereas the way I sort of understand the word faith is you're fundamentally taking something that isn't there, but saying, well, let's trust that it is with zero evidence, right?
Yeah, but you can also argue, though, there's the whole brain in a vat model, right? That nothing that no matter how rigorous our science, the only way we can interpret is through our senses. That's our interface with reality.
Yeah.
And you were talking earlier about the simulation hypothesis. In at least one mundane sense, we are all living in a simulation. We're all living a tenth of a second in the past. You can touch your nose and your toes, and you will feel those sensations simultaneously.
Yeah.
Even though it's like an order of magnitude longer for a signal to travel from your toes than your nose.
Yeah.
When somebody fires a gun from a great distance, you see the muzzle flash before you hear the sound. But the architecture of the brain that deals with sound operates faster than the architecture of the brain that deals with sight. So if the gun goes off really close to you, you will hear the sound before you before you see the flash. So what the brain basically does is to keep us from all keep us from all losing any sense of cause and effect.
Yeah.
The brain basically takes the slow signals and holds them in a cache or takes the fast signals, holds them it puts them in holding until the slow signals get there. And then it kind of processes them and integrates them into this internal model. And we do not see outside through our eyes. We are looking inside at this simulation that is refreshed by data from the outside. And there was one case in the 70s, a woman in France, where she was blind, like basically she was organically blind, but the simulation failed to update with that information. And so for 13 months, she thought she was sighted. She just kept recycling.
But the brain was doing what the eyes should be doing.
The brain kept building the simulation using old recycled data. Is what they think is happening. They don't know for sure. But for 13 months, if she, as she always did, bumped her shin on a coffee table, she would complain that somebody had moved the furniture, or she would say that she was distracted by a bird that she saw through the window. She would come up with these weird confabulations to justify the fact that she kept bumping into things.
Yeah.
But subjectively, she was still seeing a world there.
Wow.
For months.
Wow.
There are people who have gone further who have said that there are certain elements in physics, like gravitational lensing of quasars around distant black holes and stuff, that our brains shouldn't be able to parse unless reality itself doesn't look anything like what we think it does. These people argue that they use the analogy of a computer desktop, where you see a little file folder, right? And that's an icon. That's not the file. That's just an icon, and it's convenient to handle with, and you can do things with it. And they say reality is like that. Reality is the computer desktop. It's the interface. But we have absolutely no reason to think that Dahlgren actually looks like this in the real world. It could be some weird dodecahedral thing. This is just the icon on the desktop that we are capable of processing, so that nothing we perceive is real. And that's like a whole other rabbit hole that just drives you crazy if you think about it for like more than 30 seconds.
And you think talking about Samuel Delaney next is gonna help us? Yeah? You think that's the way to go?
I've read this book 3 times. I still don't really know what's going on in it. I've read essays that claim it's about some kind of something.
I'm scared of it. I've only read Babel 17, and I had a similar thing. When we got to the second half of the book, I'm like, oh man, where are we? Why are they saying that? And I'm told that one is scarier. I'm drawn to it though.
Look at this. Okay. There's the text, and then somebody has written side notes in the text. There are parts where stuff has been scratched out, and like this becomes not only a story, but a story that somebody else has annotated. So you found this book. It's like the Dead Sea Scrolls. You found it, and that only happens in the last part of the book.
So why is it on your list? Why is it on the list? You're in awe of Delaney and how he does it?
Yeah, it's, again, Delaney is one of those, you got the people like Frank Herbert, whose writing I respect and whose books are good, but I don't want to be them. People like Delaney, people like Brunner, people like Robert Silverberg, back before he went soft and went into fantasy full time. I read Delaney and I think, wow, I love the way he turns these phrases. I love the way he uses active verbs. I love the fact that the doorknob doesn't turn, the doorknob rattles loosely in its collar, right?
Yeah.
So here's this story about this kid who we know spent time in an institution. He doesn't know his own name. He's your classic unreliable narrator. At the beginning of the book, he has sex with this woman in a forest and goes into a cave and comes back with this jewelry, just in time to watch this woman he's just had sex with turn into a tree.
Right.
And that kind of scares him. And then he hitches a ride with this trucker into the city called Bologna. And Bologna looks like your standard post-apocalyptic city. Half the buildings are on fire, but they never seem to be completely consumed. Sometimes between point A and point B is like 2 blocks separating them. Sometimes it's like 5 blocks. He will spend like what he thinks is a 3-hour, he'll go off wandering about 3 hours and come back and people will tell him he's been missing for days. People wear red caps covering their cornea so that they've got like, at some point,
like a dream world. Like a dream world.
The sky is always cloudy, but it doesn't feel like it. Well, they certainly have had dreams about it. The sky is always overcast. At one point, the cloud breaks and there are 2 moons in the sky, but they're in different phases. At another point, the cloud breaks and the sun covers half the sky, but nobody's boiling, right? And none of this stuff is explained. People kind of theorize about it. People wonder if, what happened to Bologna, what was the disaster that caused this city to fall apart? Why are these warehouses full of holographic pendants that you sort of hang around your chest and they generate these weird holographic images? There's this gang called the Scorpions, because the first ones they found just generated big glowing scorpions and they would sort of walk around. It's the most immersive. I mean, the man can spend like 3 pages describing this protagonist having a bath and just kind of, licking his hands and soaping himself. And it's like, and as somebody who comes from, my formal background is in the sciences, I should have thrown this across the wall against the wall in frustration. And a number of people have, but it's just such a compelling world that, I mean, I guess this book taught me that you don't have to, not only do you not have to answer all the questions for it to be a success, but in some cases it's more successful if you don't answer the questions. This book is just it's a fucking Rorschach blot of a book.
Sounds a bit like Gene Wolfe, where he doesn't necessarily need to tell you much of what's going on. It's
okay. Now it's my turn to admit shamefacedly that I've read maybe 2 short stories by Gene Wolfe. I haven't. My wife just recently got the Book of the Long Sun. I've got Shadow of the Torture and the Death of Dr. Island. I read a collection of Gene Wolfe stories, Fifth Head of Cerberus, back when. But again, I was like 10 or 11 years old.
Well, right? That's considered that's a novel, right? They tie together as a novel, Fifth Head, right?
I wouldn't. I mean, I remember there were like 3 or 4 stories. One had some kind of a weird centipede-like robot called Mr. Million. But I mean, again, I lived in Calgary. I was just this little kid. We have in our collection this much Gene Wolfe, and I haven't read any of it yet. And I
haven't read the Book of the New Sun, right? The book.
No.
Trust me, I think it's
I'm told
my favorite.
It's amazing. I'm told that the man, in terms of his prose, he's lyrical, he's intelligent. Yeah. There are so many layers to his stuff, which is now, of course,
it's wonderful.
Scared me because I'm kind of afraid that I'll read it and it'll go right over my head. So it's probably safer to just not read it.
It will, but then you need to read it again, and then you'll go, oh, okay, that's what that was. And that's quite a hard sell to some people. What? You have to reread it? Of course you don't.
You do realize I am old and I'm going to die and don't have that many years left. I don't know how many
they're not big books. They're not big books. I'm going to keep hassling you until you read it because I think it will change your life, Peter.
I was told that about this book, which I have currently, which is now being used as
Is that not on your list?
It's on my list. I haven't read it yet. I've started it twice, and I should be reading it.
That's famously hard to penetrate. I need to read. I need to read that soon because that seems to be building up a bit of a head as well. More and more people are reading it nowadays and talking about it at last.
Not only is this book replete with footnotes, the footnotes have footnotes.
Mm.
It's kind of a fractal footnote verse. I don't know. I mean, I'm finding it interesting enough. But again, it's, you read, try and read a half an hour to an hour before you start every day. And then somebody comes up and says, hey, you want to blurb my book? Need a response by. So this gets shunted to the back again. But yeah, no, somebody has leaned on me, in fact, bought me this very book. You don't have to do that because actually I already have the Gene Wolfes. But yeah, somebody actually in Germany bought me this book and sent it to me because they were convinced it would change my life. And so far, although, the 50 or 60 pages I've read are fine, so far really what it's doing is allowing me to talk to you on a stable camera platform.
Okay, that's fine. Is that all your books? Have we gone through them all or have you got any more?
Oh, geez, let me see. Well, yeah, there's Neuromancer. Yeah, that's the 5. I mean, I would also throw in a book by Robert Silverberg called Dying Inside, which was a very literary novel.
I read it for the first time this year, and I haven't.
How does this keep happening?
Because there's a lot of.
How am I reading stuff in high school that I'm bringing up now and that you just read in the past?
I've read it for the first time this year. And it's straight in it's the best book I've read this year. I think I said in my review, that was probably the best book I've read in the last 10 years. Only because I can't think of anything else. And it's way up there for me. Dying Inside. I mean, and then somebody sent me. You can see
why I want to copy this guy's prose, right?
Somebody sent me a first edition, signed first edition.
Oh my God.
Do you want to see it?
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. There you go. First edition.
Oh, that's the one I read. I got it out of the library when I was in like grade 11 or 12 or something. Oh my God.
Don't tell anyone.
I don't have to. You have 23,000 subscribers.
No, that's not it. Don't tell anyone. But I may be interviewing Bob, as they call him. very soon.
Oh my God.
I don't know what to say. I don't know what to say to anyone, but
Well, the first thing you can tell him is that he's one of Peter Watts's heroes.
I will say,
And
I will tell him that.
yeah. Yeah,
And
no,
what's
I mean
happened is, because I reviewed it, and this is the whole point of our community, right? Loads of people discovered Robert Silverberg, and along with me were just going, where has Robert Silverberg been all my life? It's one of those names you know, but it's not until you discover him that you realise, obviously. But Dying Inside, there you go.
Yeah, no, his prose is beautiful, and there was like not a single spaceship, just some poor schmo making a marginal living, like squandering telepathy,
Exactly.
term papers, like what a. It's kind of, I don't know if I'm coming up with this or if I read it somewhere, but it's kind of like Death of a Salesman with telepaths. Is that making sense? It's just this pathetic doomed guy who you can't help but feel for, and the one thing he's had that's given him an edge is leaving him.
Well, that's the thing. When you pick up the story, it's already disappearing, and it's the reflection of what the fuck have I done? And then I guess the idea, if there is some sort of analogy, is that you look at your own life when you're older and go, I had opportunities and talent my whole life, and I didn't do anything with them. I guess that's what I get from it a little bit.
But I get the sense, again, I haven't read it since high school, but if I'm remembering the ending correctly, he's sitting with his sister at the very end.
Yeah.
Having dinner. And I almost got a sense of sort of acceptance. Like it hasn't come back for a while. He knows that he's now just a regular guy. He knows that that his gift is gone. And I almost got a sense of peace as opposed to, what I would be doing, which I would be like kicking and screaming and pounding the floor and throwing a tantrum. But this guy seems to have gracefully accepted that he has died inside.
It's just this kind of empty, neutral feeling, because it's like Silverberg didn't say, let's make him a villain. So he doesn't, it's the squandering. It's the, you didn't really do anything with it. It's such a deflating thing. And And also he doesn't have a lot of choice, but to kind of, just accept it at the end. And he just, that's kind of what it's about, isn't it?
And isn't that the absolute, it's like almost an anti-science fiction novel.
Yeah, yeah.
It's like, it suggests this weird sci-fi trope. And the whole question of science fiction is, wouldn't this be cool? What would happen if this, right?
Yeah.
And Silverberg's response to what would happen if this, when this is this incredibly mind-boggling gift, is nothing much.
No. Well, it's told in the right order as well. Not that Flowers for Algernon is in the wrong order, but you go on that journey in Flowers for Algernon, right? Where the intelligence goes up or whatever that is, and then it comes down again, and you're on that roller coaster with him. With this, it starts with the end, but then Silverberg does know, hang on, people want to know about how cool it would be when you had the powers in the first place. So he does go back to, there's that beautiful scene where he goes into the mind of a fish and then the animals, and then he feels...
And the chicken. He goes into the mind of the chicken laying the egg. And the phrase was like the voiding of a great turd.
And the farmer, and
I read this in the 1970s, and the phrases still stick with me. It's all going from me now.
If this wasn't a gift, I would send you that, but I can't send you a gift, can I? Because somebody sent it to me.
But, no, that would be. But
there you go.
But yeah, no, I mean, I long for it. If that helps, I covet it.
No, it's wonderful, and I'm not bothered about what edition I have of whatever book. But having said that, for some people kept sending me copies of Blind Sight. I don't know. It was like a famous book on my book haul, because it's like another copy of Blind Sight. Why do I need another one? So I had 3 or 4 different editions, and I thought that's not fair. So I gave the others to charity. So I put your books out there, and I kept. You're on the Wall of Fame. This is the Wall of Fame right here. There you go. I have got a hard cover, probably first edition, but without the sleeve.
Love the cover art. It's like Spinal Tap "Smell the Glove" cover art.
Is that what you're going for? Oh, you mean now?
Honestly, the original Tor artwork I did not like much at all. But
The
the
ship
head of
with
Zeus,
the black tendril stuff. You didn't like that?
you call it a ship with black tendril stuff. I call it a corkscrew flying around a giant ball of pubic hair.
Ah, okay. Now that's what I will
And the
call
weird,
it.
and the weird thing is like the artist who did that work is a good artist. Like I actually saw some of the other sketches
Yeah.
that he did for Blindsight, and any of them would have been fine, except this one for some reason. I don't know. I
You
mean, I
didn't like
had
that?
some. No, I've had. I mean, Blindsight is out in quite a number of languages and quite a number of editions, and it's gotten some absolutely gorgeous cover
Mm.
art. But yeah, no, I was not a fan. Um,
It amazes me how authors, not many, have a say in any of that. You know, in the look of the book, which is we
well,
we do judge books by their covers. You know,
well, they didn't. Yeah, well, the first my Rifters trilogy had a guy called Bruce Jensen did the covers for those, and they were absolutely brilliant. But Tor fucked up in a number of ways. Parts of Starfish were, certain copies of Starfish were printed with like 30 pages missing from the middle,
ah, nice.
and when Behemoth came out, they used an author photo without crediting the photographer. And Behemoth came out in 2 volumes, and the first one it was like there was no credit. So I wrote them and said, you seem to have missed that. Please make sure that it's rectified for the second volume, that you at least credit her for the second. Yeah, sure, we'll do that. And they didn't do it then either. I think it was I've had a pretty rocky relationship with Tor all along, but anyhow, as a result of them dropping the ball on that, I was supposed to have some kind of input into the cover art. And normally you're right. I mean, it's routine for me to get cover input, and in fact, even cover veto with overseas editions. But in North American publishing, for example, it's as far as I can tell, it's like, thanks for the manuscript. Now fuck off. If you talk to us again, we're going to call you a difficult author.
Wow.
So this time I actually had, sort of they threw me the bone by saying that I would be able to at least weigh in on what I thought of the cover art for Blindsight.
Yeah.
And they showed me 3 different sketches, all of which were your preliminary treatments, all of which were cool. I picked the one I liked, and then they took those away. And then they used this other one that you saw, the pubic hair one, which they'd never shown me. And it was like, yeah, fuck you, Tor, but that's how it happened. And then they came out with just a couple of years ago, sort of a Tor Classics reissue of Blindsight, which
the yellow one.
Yeah. It's. I didn't think it was possible. It was even worse. The cover art was even more incoherent than the
It's
first
got a nice
edition.
spine. It's got a nice kind of picture frame look to the spine when it's on the shelf.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a little bit ambiguous, isn't it? On the front.
There's little boutique publishers that. Well, I think it's supposed to be a Rorschach blot.
Oh.
but it's a Rorschach blot behind frames and text and stuff, so that it kind of breaks up what it is, so it just kind of looks incoherent. I mean, there have been boutique publishers in North America that have published very nice, like there's I think it's Centipede that did both Echopraxia and Blindsight.
Right.
And they're like little Bibles. They're like leather bound. They have one of those little cloth stripping.
Oh yeah. The good stuff, yeah.
Internal illustrations. The cover is embossed. I mean, it's just absolutely beautiful stuff. So, by and large, I got absolutely no complaints. And even Tor. I mean, I love the Rifters. If anything, the cover art for the Rifters books was better than the text and the prose in the Rifters books. But yeah, no, that one.
Have you
cover? I don't know what happened.
Have you noticed a kind of uptick in the popularity with Blindsight in the last couple of years? Because I have. It seems as though this book has More people are talking about Blindsight than ever before. Than ever before. It's like finally, years later, it's getting super recognition. Do you
Well, there is,
feel that? Do you see that?
yeah. I think there's a few reasons for that. One of them is that a couple of years ago, a Russian expat who works in the FX industry got a bunch of his buddies together, and it took them 4 years, and they did this little 5-minute short trailer for Blindsight. And because these guys are professional FX people, and because they worked in the business, they got professional.
Oh, that's on YouTube, right? The little
Yeah, it's on
short film.
Vimeo too. It's like brilliant. It's like 4.5 minutes. It went on the festival circuit. It won shitloads of awards for
Ah,
animation. So there was that, and that got quite a lot of coverage. Neil Blomkamp from the District 9 dude is working on a not on Blindsight, but working on a sort of a 20 minutes into the future take on the speculative vampire biology
right.
that I came up with that. And also the book itself is optioned for, it's currently being developed for a movie. So there's more. Neil went on Joe Rogan's podcast and kind of raved about the vampire aspect. And Joe Rogan has like a huge reach and huge influence. So that,
Oh, yeah.
Immediately after that, like my Amazon numbers sort of whipped up into like almost the 3 digits, which they have not been since the turn of the decade.
Well, it's about to be our community read along in February. I mean, small numbers compared to Joe Rogan, but
Every little bit helps.
a lot of people will find it who normally wouldn't, because a lot of people do join in that kind of thing. I'm blowing my own trumpet ever so slightly harder than I should be, but you'll be the feature author for that month, February, and
Well,
I'm going to reread it as well. It's been a while, so I'm looking forward to reading it.
Some will hate it. I mean, it's
yeah, but isn't that the best
job?
Yeah, that's the best, right? You want a slither of people that hate it, because that's kind of a label of prestige, isn't it? You don't want to appeal to the masses.
It depends. It depends on the people. There's
the masses.
My
mum's not gonna like it. All right, but
my mum didn't like it either. But then again, my mom didn't like Starfish. Starfish was like a New York Times notable book, and so she finally read it, and she said, this was her reaction after it was made the New York Times notable. It just makes me so sad that you have such a way with language. You have such beautiful writing, and yet you have to throw it away with all that foul language.
Oh no!
Why do your characters have to use that kind of profanity? I'm glad she's dead. She's been dead.
It's a good question. Yeah.
But yeah, it's where was I going with this? I'm having a senior moment.
You the people that appreciate your book compared to
yeah. So there's this website. I ego surf every now and then, right? And so search engines come up with great classic work of science fiction, a thing for the ages, Peter Watts, click, 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 click. And I find myself on this site called Return of the Kings. And it's a men's rights organization.
Men's rights?
Yeah, it's like they're sort of up there with the Oath Keepers and the Proud Boys, and they're kind of a back to traditional values where women do what their man tells them to do, and masculinity is not something to be ashamed of, and
right.
And it's like, on the one hand, it's like, dude, I'm really glad you liked my book, but dude, I don't want to be associated with the men's rights groups.
Yeah, kind of tough, right? Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I can be, it's. I would never turn down a sale, but yeah, you don't. You're right. You don't really have a choice about the people who like or don't like your stuff. But
it's art, right? It's art. It's not yours anymore.
Yeah, people keep fucking saying that. And something else that pisses me off is that, people seem to think that they somehow know, but that by this is what Peter Watts was thinking when he did this.
Ah,
Well, no, it wasn't. This is what he wrote. No, I did not write that. Those words never appeared in the book. But this is what he was thinking, and because the art no longer belongs to him, he doesn't get to he doesn't get to
no, that's not that's not what it means,
but that's what some people take it to mean, because the artist frequently.
I love the death of the author.
The art frequently betrays things that the artist himself is not aware of. And if you're, some of the smarter ones even said he wrote an entire book on how you can't trust your consciousness. So obviously anything he says can't be taken at face value. Whereas I apparently immune to those biases. So I'll say whatever I like. There were people complaining about the whiteness of the crew, for example, which
people will complain about. We were talking about that at the beginning of the interview, weren't we? How nothing, I mean, it's nothing better to complain about than to make shit up.
It's not, and you try not to take it personally. It's not that they don't like you; it's that they're trying to enhance their own social status, and so they got to find something to plant a flag on.
Yeah, stay out of the comments section. Just don't bother. Don't bother. I mean, it's a nuanced difference, I think, when we're talking about what I call the death of the author concept, because I believe when your art is out there, everybody can have their own interpretation. That's what I take from it. It's about the experience, right? You're reading Blindsight for a completely different filter than someone else. My mum is not going to understand any of it or get what it is. I'm going to get some of it. Someone else is going to get someone else, different parts of it. So therefore, your interpretation of it and your enjoyment and your filtering is yours. I love that. But there's a big difference between that and saying what Peter Watts was saying because how could they possibly know? How could they know? And you probably don't know completely, right? Well, it came out of you at a certain time in your life, and
I will admit that there are times when I look back at something and I say that can't possibly have been a coincidence. Like, that just fits together so well that I must have on some subconscious level known what I was doing. Even though, I mean, when you are writing, there are times when it's just a painful slog and you're like going to thesaurus.com to try and find a less hackneyed way of saying the same old thing. But there are other times when you are in the zone. And if you happen to have music on, you stop, you immediately become ignorant of the music. Like you don't hear the music anymore. And you're like, it's like you're channeling the thing down in your brainstem.
Wow.
And there are times when I write, when I'll just sort of get into that zone and then come out of it later, and I will have written a bunch of stuff. And yeah, at that point, anything that was written there might have been intentional, but not consciously intentional.
Wow.
Because I don't actually remember how I did that stuff. But then there's, the other much more prevalent form of writing where you're consciously hammering away at each thing and trying to see what works and realizing that you use too many italics or that you're using too many M dashes, whatever. And that is so painfully and painstakingly conscious that there's nothing subconscious in that. Everything is, I'm pretty sure. But every story is a mixture of those two things. So I've got absolutely nothing. I'll certainly take credit if somebody thinks that I've configured two halves of a book or two books to mimic two halves of a brain. I'll take credit for that. Sure. Yeah. I was.
Well, you done it. One way or another, you done it.
Yeah. Or something inside of me did.
Well, I think we're ending on some sort of positive, because I thought we were just going to be talking about we're all fucked for 2 hours, but I think we turned it around, right?
Well, no, we're still fucked, but we're probably not going to get. Okay, we've also got the possibility of imminent nuclear apocalypse. Okay, but assuming we avoid that, which is, you know, let's not take bets on that yet.
Yeah.
But if the Ukraine-Russia situation somehow resolves itself, according to MIT, we've probably got until 2040 before global societal collapse begins.
2040.
And
I'll be pretty old by then.
Total agricultural soil exhaustion by 2050. By the end of the century, humanity's population will have declined by somewhere between 40 to 60%.
See, we're in a race. We're fucking it up, but the technology is trying to nose ahead, and they're in a fight between the magic singularity that can fix everything and fucking it up. And it's like, at the moment, it's like a tie. Maybe not a tie, but there's some hope. I have some hope.
Have you read The Peripheral, William Gibson's latest?
No. Oh, was that a TV show?
It's in fact shit. It's probably premiering tomorrow. Now that I think of it,
I've heard about the. Is it a book and a show, or is it just a show?
It's the book. It's a novel, but it's also coming out as a prestige television limited series.
At the same time.
No, the book came out a couple of years ago.
I'm not in the loop with Gibson, and I should be.
Well, the basic background. This isn't really spoilery stuff because it's not the plot, but the basic background is that we are fucked, and we all die, and most of the population does crash, but also the magic tech persists. So what you have 70 years down the road is a future in which hardly anybody, you can walk down the streets of London and not see anybody because most people are dead. But the people that have survived now have access to the magic carbon sequestration and high-tech tech. And essentially let you turn things into things are cool again. Things are nice, and basically Earth has run a fever and burned most of the bugs off, and the bugs that survive have a pretty good standard of living.
So it's a big reset, but whoever has survived, so it's not.
They call it the jackpot. I don't know why they call it the jackpot. Jackpot sounds like a positive thing, and I kept reading through this book because Gibson, right? He never basically jumps and drops everything. He never front loads everything. You just got these people talking about the jackpot. Right. And about halfway through the book, you realize that the jackpot was, in fact, global societal collapse. And why they would call it jackpot, I don't know. I would call it the collapse myself.
Because the survival is better in the long run. Like it's a bit of a reset, but it's not like Earth abides or something like that, where you kind of we lose all knowledge, but it doesn't matter because we kind of start again in the rubble, right? This one, you kind of retain a little bit more for the next step.
Maybe.
Got to think way ahead.
If you get Gibson on your show, ask him about that. Ask him why he used the term jackpot for something that was anything but.
Man, I wouldn't know what to talk to Gibson about, but we're trying for everyone at the moment. We're in talks, and some people are harder to talk to than others. There's a few agents in between, and you're not actually talking to the real people. Oh, yeah.
That's weird.
It happens.
If there are agents involved, then that implies that you're paying people for this.
I wouldn't dare. I'll tell you off camera a couple of stories if you want, right? If we wrap up, I will gladly. I will share some stories, but we're going to need to stop recording for that one. So,
okay.
Thank you very much, Peter. That was fascinating. I think we've got 20 minutes of footage in there, don't you think? Yeah, we can make a video out of that.
Once you take out all the profanity and the child molestation jokes, I'm sure we've got a fair.
Don't worry about that. Whatever. We're a grown-up channel. Thank you very much. I'll wave goodbye. Thank you.
My pleasure. Nice talking to you guys.